Welcome to a brand new episode of the Focus Bee Show. I'm really excited today to be here with Connor Swenson. Connor is a speaker, facilitator, writer, and coach, and he helps teams to sustain peak performance, high performance. Needless to say, we have a lot in common. Thank you so much, Connor, for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Katie, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. As you're a facilitator and you do different workshops, two of the most common ones you run are Make Time, linked to productivity, and Search Inside Yourself, linked to mindfulness. Could you share a bit why you feel maybe the productivity and mindfulness are related, or how you feel they're related?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So, I think it's helpful to ground maybe ourselves in some definitions. When I talk about mindfulness, I'm mainly talking about awareness. So, being aware of our thoughts, our emotional states, sensations in the body, but it's just generally kind of a state of awareness. Obviously, we develop it and practice it, as I'm sure your listeners know, through tools like meditation. And then when I think about productivity, I think a lot about kind of effectiveness over efficiency. And why I think the two are linked. One of the big reasons is, my experience. I spent 7 years at Google, so I've kind of familiar in the big corporate world, but also working on behalf of Google, lots of startups. There's a lot of kind of busy work that's happening in our offices today, and what can feel like productivity is often misplaced. So I think that there's a general sense of awareness can help guide us into being more effective, because we're more aware in any given moment of things like where we're placing our attention or how we're kind of responding to certain situations. So I think that's one link. And then the second I think is important is mindfulness helps us to be somewhat more proactive in our approach. Without mindfulness and without sort of training our attention and awareness, we get lost in this kind of autopilot mode. It's like you're going home on the bus back in the days when we took buses to go home. I guess you're still doing it in Sweden a bit. And all of a sudden you miss your stop, right? And you're just you're totally mindless and on autopilot. And when we're doing that, we're kind of operating in our days, we're kind of going through the motions without really paying much attention to what we're doing, how we're doing it, how is our energy affecting that kind of task. So yeah, I think there's the third thing is also mindfulness. I would say helps you drop some of the expectations of others, which I think in today's world is really important when it comes to achieving kind of quote unquote productivity, because often it has to do more with what you internally feel is important, what matters to you, and drawing a boundary and getting less caught up in the expectations of others. So kind of interweaves in many ways. I'll stop there because that's a big question to unpack, but at least that gives us a little fodder to start the conversation.
Yes, I love the fact that you said mindfulness is awareness. I often think of mindfulness as being present,
Mhm.
but obviously this is directly linked to being aware when we're present. But it's another way of formulating it that I think people sometimes might resonate with more, because I think not everyone really understands what it means to be fully present in an activity when they're not used to that feeling. And a lot of people are on autopilot, which is why I loved what you said about actually moving away from autopilot and being more conscious about what we're doing. I also feel, just to add a tiny note, that people enjoy busyness and
Mhm.
think of it as productivity. So there might be a slight resistance to the mindfulness and being present, because that might mean they need to take breaks. That might mean they need to go for a walk and detach from their work for a bit. And there's a lot of significance and importance and, I don't know, self-recognition and recognition of others that comes from this feeling of busyness. So while we're on this, maybe because you touched about on it a bit, could you explain the difference between productivity and busy, and what both of these actually look like in reality? So not just theoretically.
Yeah. Yeah, you touched on something that's really nice. Is I think we're all, me too, very addicted to the feeling of being busy. We're hardwired, I think, to want this kind of quick dopamine hits from doing busy things, replying to a bunch of emails or texts instead of something that takes a bit more concentration and focus. So yeah, I think to me, real productivity, especially in kind of the worlds in which I work in, I'd say sort of the modern workplace and within the knowledge economy, it's often called. I think real productivity is focusing on the right things, and often that comes at the expense of doing all the things. So I think we commonly misconstrue productivity in today's world with this sort of industrial era mindset where it's very much seen as how much can you get done in a given amount of time. So it's sort of like output over time. But in many jobs today, the output isn't necessarily so clear. In creative jobs or strategic jobs, sometimes it's a longer term goal we're working towards. You're not just making things in a factory. So it's harder for people to kind of wrap their heads around because often doing the right things, okay, what are those things? The things that are going to give you, the 80-20 sort of Pareto's principle of what's going to drive the most impact. But it's often difficult to ascertain in every day, which is part of that difficulty is what drives us, I think, to the lower importance, but kind of higher quick reward activities. So for example, I would consider if you're a manager and you have a team and you have 8 to 10 people on your team, I would consider a productive activity spending 1 to 2 hours at the beginning of the week, thinking and reflecting about what your team is focused on, what's the key things that you're trying to look for the week, who is being bottlenecked where, and giving yourself kind of the space to maybe have a more strategic managerial mindset with those folks. What I would say is probably not super productive is starting a day and immediately kind of piling into the Slack inboxes, sending off lots of emails to the people that you manage. Hey, where's this? Is this getting done? Can we do a meeting on this? And I think that is where we get pulled a lot of the times because of the kind of reward system. It looks like that's productive, but it's kind of on the surface level. But then deeper down, you're not really making the more sustained effort at the things that matter. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one to define, but certainly it's usually the things that you are most avoiding, right? So it's like the things that you fear the most, that are the most kind of difficult for you to lock into. Those are generally the things that I encourage teams to like really look at and think, how can you lean into those? Because there's usually that's a good signal that it's going to be a productive use of your time. If it's in some ways you're a little bit worried about leaning into it, I would say.
Absolutely. I feel that often we procrastinate things out of fear, and we often procrastinate the things that have the biggest impact and therefore are more important and therefore should be the ones we tackle first. And I love particularly what you said about doing the small work because we haven't figured out our priorities. I look back to when I started my business, 100% that was me, doing a bunch of little tasks of no importance to not tackle actually figuring out my business strategy. That would have been a good place to start. So yes, definitely. And it is linked to the dopamine we get from the small tasks. And also, I often feel that hyper focus or high levels of productivity and peak performance are habits. And equally, just being busy is also a habit. So for people that are used to starting the day with the emails and the Slack channel, they've done this every day for years. So it's a habit. And when you start the day suddenly with writing your book, I'm writing a book, there can be a bit of a resistance and well, maybe there's something more urgent. But once you get into the habit of always beginning with your most important task, which is what all the productivity gurus say, but it's true, it's important, then you not immediately, actually, over the long term, you have a reward.
Yeah.
A book, for example.
Yeah, 100%.
Nice. And so what would be your definition of peak performance in general? Do you distinguish this from productivity? Do you see productivity as a part of peak performance, or is it a whole for you?
Yeah, I think you know, peak performance, I think there's, yeah, again, there's lots of people's definitions that float around. I mean, I think it's simply just, achieving kind of the best of your capability and doing it in a way which is sustainable over time. So often, achieving your very best can come at the expense of the sustainability piece, because we lean so heavily into overwork and kind of pushing things, and then we don't give ourselves the rebound. I think a lot of this, I guess, discussion on peak performance certainly originated in the sports psychology and sports science world, and I think we're drawing on a lot of the research in that field when we apply it to a daily, kind of a daily job, or kind of an executive or an entrepreneur. And there's kind of these parallels to be driven. And so now we're seeing a lot more discussion around how important rest is, how important it is to balance your sort of energy expenditure. We're looking at how athletes kind of train themselves with really intense, sustained periods of focus, and then and rest. So I think for me, peak performance, it's part of, I think, the danger and the toxic part of productivity is we're constantly kind of looking at these insanely, productive superhumans who are projecting an image like that for their own kind of brand and their own stature. And so we're constantly comparing ourselves. Like, I don't write as many books as this person. I'm not as fast as this person. So I think part of it is coming to terms with, okay, what's my capabilities? Where am I at my best? Am I spending a lot of time doing what I'm best at? And am I optimizing for my own reward, my own benefits? Because it can be very toxic sometimes when we kind of tag ourselves to what we see online, what we see in others, and that can kind of be the downside, I think, of the peak performance mindset, is always trying to outperform the next person, whereas more about, just as a good coach with an athlete would see, is like, what's this athlete's potential, right? Some people are going to be long distance runners, and some people are going to be sprinters or high jumpers, kind of figuring that out, and then saying, okay, like, are you putting as much effort as you can in the most disciplined and structured way, or are you doing so in a way that's sustainable and that allows you to perform in the 10, 20, 30-year horizon? So that's kind of the different elements of how I think about it.
Yes, I love how you say about letting go of the comparison and trying to outperform people. And in general, the whole mindset around peak performance. It's such a key way of looking at things, to let go of this pressure and to tap into the zone of genius. You didn't put it as such, but it's basically working on your strengths and not comparing yourself with others. This makes me think of another way in which many people, and I know myself and probably you have too, try to outperform, and that's outperforming ourselves. And I know I have struggled with this a lot more than comparison, because I do believe we all have different strengths, we all work at different rhythms. I don't often compare, maybe for inspiration or ideas, but not in the sense of, oh, they've done better, I have to do as well as this person. But I have, especially in the past, I'm working on it, but constantly thought, I'm not doing well enough, I'm not doing as well as I could. And this is a typical hyperachiever tendency, and it's trying to outperform ourselves. And the reason I mention it now is I know that people that are interested in peak performance have a bit of this tendency, right? There's a reason we want our potential, but also we attract people that are like this. Typically, all my clients are hyperachievers. Like in the saboteur test on positive psychology, they're all number one, pretty much hyperachievers. So I'm wondering, how do you help people to still reach their potential, still do really great, take some rest, but also have this mindset of acceptance and it's enough? So it's like a duality, because you want to continuously strive but also accept where you're at right now.
Yeah, it's definitely a big paradox. There's an old Zen proverb or saying, which is everything is perfect and there's room for improvement. And I think that does a good job of summing it up. And I do think the kind of the striving to better ourselves is if it's on the right path. And I mean, right is kind of an interesting question, but for me, if it's on sort of a virtuous path, we could say, if it's if you're doing things for uh, uh, reasons that are really true for you, then leaning into that struggle to constantly be improving and constantly be being better, I think is good. And like, and Viktor Frankl, who I really love, who's, you know, a psychiatrist and wrote Man's Search for Meaning, many know him. And he talks about that what man doesn't need is like this tensionless state, but kind of this constant struggling for purpose. So I do think that there's something in that, and that what we're not looking to achieve is just total uh, passive resignation or acceptance and the like. But at the same time, I think where mindfulness can come into this is that when we become more aware of, okay, what do I truly care about? What am I really trying to optimize for? How is this different than the voices in my head, which are usually programmed there from some sort of societal expectation or cultural or our family or our parents? And finding a balance to recognize, okay, what's important for me and how am I pushing there? Because what I often find with people and organizations that I work with where there's lots of high achievers is they're doing really well at the clearly defined lane in life, which is like they're doing well from a career or a financial or an economic perspective, because that's like the most obvious indicator and the most well accepted um, element of sort of what success looks like. But then when you dig one level beneath the surface and you say, well, are you happy with your relationships? Or are you happy with what life's like at home with your family or your partner? Or are you happy with how your health is and your fitness? Often, not, but not always, but some of those things can be severely neglected. And so it's like there's a kind of a conditioning which needs to be sort of unwound. And I'm not saying that optimizing for financial success, you know, that enables many of the other pillars, I think, of your overall well-being. But there's certainly this kind of push and pull where it's hard to figure out, okay, what do you really want to do? And yes, it's okay to push yourself and be improving, but like, you don't want to, if you're optimizing for the wrong metrics and you're constantly trying to improve for this thing and all you do is go really far down that path, but you're not where you want it to be, it's not a really good strategy as well. So yeah, I think it is the paradox of our time. And I think there's so much to be said about this kind of this idea of even the worth of a human being, its productivity. Like this is very much kind of something that is unquestioned, but it's also recognizing where does that come from? Like, why do I feel I need to do or achieve to be whole and successful? And I think, again, striving is good, but finding that balance between, okay, I'm not like, I don't necessarily need those things to be whole and happy with myself, but that's yeah, it's an endless quest. I don't have any answers, right? And this year, me paraphrasing some of the great minds and thinkers, and me as well working through that question for myself.
Yes, and it's interesting what you just shared right now in terms of the fact that some people will put all their eggs in one basket or will only focus on their career and finance and neglect the other aspects because maybe that's their definition of success beforehand or programmed or from the outside, or maybe it's the image they want to portray. And so looking at what would success look like in a more holistic way, taking into account all areas of life. In the case of my high achiever, it taps into all areas. So how can my fitness be better? How can my sleep? But obviously this is because we work in this area. But I think that's not bad technically, because as you said, bad is a terrible word. But as you said, it's about finding the balance and the sort of constant struggle for improvement, like you quote Viktor Frankl. It's more can be more detrimental to someone's well-being and happiness if they decide to only focus on, and it tends to be career and finance, because then it leads to this disbalance. And that does come up with quite a few high achievers that maybe for some reason are trying to overcompensate in their career and business.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're overachieving on the path to, you know, inner peace or contentment and life satisfaction, I think it's all good. But
I'll
when you
keep that in mind every day.
when you start overachieving the other directions, you know, it's yeah, again, that's where the more we become somewhat detached from those external validations, then I think the freer we become in the world to go after what's our calling and our purpose. And the less expectation we have, it seems that the more uh, present and joyful the ride can be. So yeah, you often are forgetting when you're overachieving. It's like you're forgetting to enjoy the ride, right? It's just like there's this goal at the distance, and until you reach that goal every day, until that is very unhappy. That's part of why I love using the make time framework, and we use a different, it's not a productivity mindset, but it's more not about doing more, but about kind of spending the time on what matters to you. And instead of having these big long goals, you just have this daily highlight. It's something that you can spend time on, and if you've spent time there, you can count it as a success. Because I think the goals and the objectives, like you're constantly, yeah, you're failing every day until you hit the goal. So I kind of that is also like another piece of the puzzle. But yeah, I digress on that point.
Yes, but that's such a good point, the expectations and the journey. I remember when I switched my mindset from goals to journey, it makes such a difference. As a coach, I loved goals. I was all about goals and milestones, and then I realized that there was this tension and dissatisfaction until I reached it. And
Yeah.
this is extremely common. And when I switched it over to my goal is to make every day a beautiful day. My goal is to, you know, be as peaceful and joyful as I can every day. My goal is to work as much as possible in my zone of genius. Once I switched it over, then every day is great. And yeah, you keep the goals in the back of your mind because your actions are aligned with it. But you know what? Even if I don't reach my goals, I'm still glad we did this podcast interview, even if it has 5 views, 500, 5,000. That's enjoying the journey. Not enjoying the journey would be like, okay, right, one more podcast episode done, two. How many more do I need to do? How's my ranking doing? That I check these things to see the progress, but enjoying the journey consists of being present when it's happening and actually enjoying it and not being focused on the goals. So that's a great point. Before we finish, because we have 5 minutes or so left, I would love to touch a bit on your Vipassana retreat. I actually realized that this is a topic that's never come up, I think, in a podcast episode, even though I'm really big on mindfulness and have had lots of conversations with many people offline. So if you could just share a tiny bit, I know it's a big topic on Vipassana, and also if you could go into equanimity, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, so for those who haven't heard the term, Vipassana is often uh, seen as sort of the standard 10-day silent retreat. And there's a beautiful organization called Dhamma.org, DHAMMA, where it's kind of an international community of Vipassana retreat centers. The beautiful thing is that you can attend totally for free, the food, the board, everything. So it's a very accessible experience, and so it's available for anyone. I think the 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 you know the goal of there's not really I guess a goal in any meditation practice in so much, but I think one of the true teachings of the Vipassana style retreat is experiential learning. So often someone tells you, oh, you should read this religious text and what's in here is true, you should follow it. Or someone says, you should listen to this speech and follow these things. And we kind of learn at this intellectual level, but we don't really learn those lessons for ourselves until we go through the experience and we think, oh, yeah, it was a good suggestion, a piece of advice. So Vipassana, you are 10 days, you're entirely silent. There are others on the retreat, but you do not interact, you don't make eye contact, you don't talk. You meditate for 7 to 10 hours a day. It's kind of all you do. There's no writing in a journal, there's no reading a book. It's just pure dedicated meditation. And through this experience, they teach you sort of this awareness technique, which is very similar to sort of body scan. And what you start to realize is some of these like core universal truths that often originate from the East and from traditions like Buddhism, for example, right? That all, impermanence of everything. So in Vipassana, you're sitting there and you're 2 hours into a meditation and your knee is going to fall off because you haven't been able to move. And the teaching is, look, like, notice this is a sensation. If you pay attention close enough, you'll realize that the knee throbbing soon becomes the foot being pins and needles, soon comes the hip, and then it's all gone. And in light of that, you start to practice this idea of equanimity, which is just like a calm stability in the face of any difficulty. Like, easiest analogy I think for equanimity is like a stone in the river, and as the river kind of washes past the stone and the tide is higher or lower, the river freezes, the stone like is there unmoving. And so you're experiencing this in the Vipassana retreat, in a sense, is that you become this sort of stable, grounded presence, this higher self, and you're witnessing the sensations in the body, the impermanence of everything, and you just continue to practice this mindset of equanimity, of just kind of stability and calm and ease in the face of difficulty. And it's quite profound, right? That a lot of people, myself included, you leave a retreat like that with a newfound sort of experiential sense of what some of these great teachings talk about. So definitely a marathon for the mind. One of the hardest things I've done, especially for us modern humans, to kind of shut up for 10 days and just to sit in stillness is hugely challenging, but also in the same way quite rewarding. So I think equanimity is this beautiful term. It's used often in the yogic tradition, and I think it's kind of a mother virtue, right? If we can kind of practice equanimity in all areas of life, we can respond more skillfully, we can be more resilient, we can allow the world to be crazy and volatile, but we can remain kind of stable and grounded in ourselves. So that's my 3 to 4 minutes on Vipassana. And I wrote a blog on it, so you can link to that. People could read that and reach out to me on Twitter or whatever if curious. But if you're curious and you have the itch, you should just go do it. It's free, it's fun. Well, it's not that fun, but
it's not fun, but you learn an awful lot out of it. I love what you said about it being learning through experiencing it and not through textbook. And
yeah,
there's so many areas in life, especially what I mentioned earlier about, I knew about the journey and not the goals. I'd heard, it's all about the journey, not the destination. But until you feel it, it's just words, it's just intellectual, it's things you say. But then one day you wake up and you think, oh, it's about the journey. It's like, yeah, I read this about 500 times. And that sounds the same. It sounds like these are concepts and then you live it.
yeah. I think that's just life anyways, right? It's information and knowledge. It's just one thing, and then it becomes learned through experience. It becomes wisdom in a sense. And unfortunately, people will tell you all these nice things and say, you should really, don't burn any bridges. And you say, yeah, okay, I'm not going to burn any bridges. And then not until you burn a bridge and then you realize how bad of a choice that was, that you're like, oh, I get that now. It's you have to touch the stovetop and burn your hand at least once for that's kind of the way humans learn, which is for better or for worse. But yeah.
Yes, learning through experiencing it. I can't believe the podcast is already over. It went by so quickly. I'm sure we could talk about mindfulness and Vipassana and productivity all day. Thank you so much, Connor, for being on the show.
Yeah, huge pleasure. Thank you so much.